Morning. Who's sick of the rain this year? Who'd like to see some sun? How's that? There we are. Now, let's turn the camera around and let's have a look at the Earth. Lots of astronauts look at the Earth from space and they worry about how thin our atmosphere is. They worry about how fragile it looks and how we should care for it and not pollute it. Hardly any of them mention the few inches of topsoil, and yet it's as critical to our survival as the atmosphere. My talk today is about the sun and the soil. As a farmer, I have three key goals. I want to capture and sell sunlight. I want to build new topsoil. And I want to spend no money doing it. If I can capture and sell sunlight in the form of milk or grain or meat or eggs, whatever, and if I can improve my greatest resource, which is my soil, then I will have a good business. However, if I can do both of these things without spending money, then I will have a great business. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Holy Grail. It's what I've been searching for on my Nuffield, and it's what I've traveled the globe for, and I truly believe I found the farming system that comes closer to this Holy Grail than virtually any other system in the world. The system that captures sunlight efficiently, that builds new soil at a dramatic rate, and which reduces costs, is mob-grazed cattle. So what is mob grazing? Well, before I explain, I'd like to read you a quote. It was written in the 1880s by an American explorer, and he said, "From the top of Pawnee Rock, I could see 6 to 10 miles in almost every direction. The whole vast space was covered with buffalo, looking at a distance like one compact mass, the visual angle not permitting the ground to be seen." And he went on to say that the herd was so great that it took 5 days for it to pass by. Mob grazing is an attempt to copy the actions of these herds. You see, grasses have evolved over millions of years under exactly these conditions. They were exposed to the intermittent, intensive grazing and trampling by these huge herds. But then they'd have months and months to recover before the animals returned. Pre-farming, such migratory herds wandered across much of Europe and Asia and North and South America. And grasses, the very physiology and morphology of grasses actually were molded by these grazing habits. And it's only in the past few hundred years that we humans have started to fence in our animals, and we force them to eat the same plant over and over again. And we never give that plant time to create seeds, to form seeds and to complete its life cycle. So mob grazing is the strategic use of electric fencing. The cattle are grouped or mobbed closely together and they're moved frequently onto fresh ground. It's designed to mimic what would happen in nature if we let it. The forage where they're mobbed is eaten and trampled, and then it has several months rest free from any grazing pressure. These are Neil Dennis's cattle in Saskatchewan. Now, there's about 1,000 head in this herd, and as you can see, they're mobbed really tightly. Neil tends to move them onto fresh grazing up to 10 times a day, and the trampling he gets is incredible. As a result, only about 50% of the forage is actually eaten, with the rest being laid on the soil surface to make the new soil. Now, of course, you don't have to move this many times. I mean, Neil is quite extreme in more ways than one for those who've met him. But 1 or 2 moves a day will be more than adequate. The important point is to make sure that the grass gets a long rest period between grazings. So what would we see on a mob-grazed farm? Well, the first thing we'd notice would be the size of the grass plants. It's just like being in an old-fashioned hay meadow. There are waist-high seeds, and the long, juicy leaves capture lots of sunlight. They're like huge solar panels. Once we've captured the sunlight, we can then, of course, then sell it. The length of the roots mirrors the length of the leaves. It's common sense, really, but if we let the plant grow for 40 or 60 or 80 days before it's regrazed, then we produce a lot more organic matter, both above and below the ground. When cattle come along and graze the plant self-prunes these roots. It can't support them, so they die off. These dead and decaying roots add huge amounts of organic matter into the soil. This massive food, it's like a giant heartbeat. It pumps energy into the soil every time the cattle come and graze the land. The next thing we'd notice when walking our mob-grazed farm would be the trampled forage. The cows come along and they eat the best bits of the plant first. They select the seed heads and the leaves, and the tougher stalks get trampled onto the soil surface where they're slowly broken down to make the topsoil. It's this ability to selectively graze which explains just why the cattle perform so well on what many people would consider to be over-mature pastures. They aren't eating the whole plant, and consequently, I think if you saw the condition of animals being mob-grazed, you'd be really surprised. They are in tip-top condition. When walking our mob-grazed farm, we'd also notice how springy the soil is. Farms that have been mob-grazed for several years build a thick layer of peat-like topsoil, and this soil acts like a huge sponge. It absorbs intensive rainfall, and it reduces ponding and runoff. It also holds on to water for longer during periods of drought, and the plants keep growing and stay green for longer. And this peaty layer gets thicker and thicker every year, and the ground becomes more biologically active and more fertile. So, mob grazing. The cattle are tightly bunched together, but they only stay on a patch of land for a few hours before being moved. The land they're grazing has this tall, dense layer of mature forage above ground, and it also has this thick layer of peat-like soil below ground. As a result, and despite the high stocking densities, mob-grazed cattle don't tend to damage the sward. Even in the wettest of weather, poaching of the sward is minimal, and this is a game changer. It means cattle can be kept outside for longer and longer into the winter. And if a cow is harvesting its own forage, we don't need to make silage. If a cow is harvesting its own forage, we don't need a muck spreader or a feeder wagon, nor do we need to bale straw or bed up yards. I visited Greg Judy in Missouri. Greg farms 250 suckler cows, and the only machines on his ranch were a quad bike and a pickup. He doesn't own a tractor, nor does he have any sheds, and his cattle are outside all year round. And what he does is, he shuts off a section of his farm in midsummer, and he uses this grass as a standing hay crop. He feeds the cows through the winter, and as a result, his cost of production is next to nothing. And when I pushed him, he admitted that his margin per calf was ridiculously high. I believe we need to get closer to Greg's model here in the UK. I said at the beginning, I have 3 goals. Mob grazing gives me my deep-rooted plants with the long leaves to capture lots of sunlight. Mob grazing pumps organic matter into the soil, and it builds topsoil. And mob grazing makes the cattle, not me, do the work, and this means I can spend a lot less money raising each calf. It achieves all of my goals, but it's not enough. The title of my study topic was, Are Mob-Grazed Cattle the Perfect Arable Break? My ultimate goal was to find out how we can get cattle back onto our arable land. How can we include these topsoil-building, fertility-enhancing creatures into our crop farms without having a detrimental effect on our bottom line? Following my travels, I now dream of seeing East Anglia covered once more in grazing livestock. And here's why. In Argentina, I met some great and truly inspirational farmers. Fernando Pasan was one of them, and that's him on the left, chatting to a neighboring farmer. He and all the other Argentinian farmers I met were committed to integrating cattle into their arable rotation. Cattle were seen as a key component to their profitability, and cows added a level of financial resilience to their business. This summarizes some of the data that Fernando gave to me. The gross margin for arable-only cropping is the blue bar on the left, and we can see that having 4 years of cattle alternated with 4 years of cropping, which is the red bar, gives an average farm gross margin some 20% higher. The green bar on the right actually shows 4 years of cattle followed by 12 years of cropping, and still the gross margin is over 20% higher than it is if you don't have cattle in the rotation. The beneficial effects of cattle on arable land last for a long, long time, and the message from South America was really loud and really clear. Cattle should be part of the arable rotation. I want to raise another issue. If our main goal as farmers is to capture sunlight, why is so much of our arable land unable to do this for a lot of the year? This graph shows the average amount of sunlight that hits the UK each month. In early to mid-July, our arable crops start to die off, and from this point on, and until the new crop emerges, none of the sunlight streaming to Earth is being intercepted. For 2 or 3 months, there aren't any green leaves available to capture the energy, and the crop's dead, and that's a huge waste. And it happens when the days are at their longest and the amount of sunlight lost is at its highest. Should we alter the way we farm? Should we try to capture more of this sunlight? Could we broadcast our winter forage crops into a standing corn crop before harvest? Could we get them emerged and growing, and then, when we cut the corn, we've still got green leaves there to capture the sunlight? We could then graze this crop through the winter. It would mean a switch to spring cropping, but would this double cropping mean our profits improve? We'd definitely capture more sunlight this way. Finally, the biggest hurdle stopping cattle becoming part of the arable rotation is people. I've no doubt there are lots of you listening to me now thinking, it's a nice idea, Tom, but quite frankly, I don't want to keep cattle. I haven't got the skills, I'm not too keen on them, and if I'm honest, I'd rather go shooting all winter. See, James is nodding. I can see your point of view. I don't understand, but then I love cattle. But could we turn this hurdle into an opportunity? Could we give new entrants access to the land? They could graze the cattle when there's grass in the rotation and pay a rent for doing so. The rest of you can farm the arable bits, making use of the extra fertility the cows have brought. I'll be honest, I see this as a massive opportunity for myself too. I'm currently building a contract grazing business with just this in mind. I'll provide the cattle and the labour. You, as arable farmers, provide the land and the crop. I get access to land. You get more productive land. It could be as simple as that. My plan could even result in East Anglia being covered once again in herds of grazing livestock, as well as lots of new entrant young farmers. Then, ladies and gentlemen, I would know my Nuffield Scholarship had been truly successful. Thank you for listening. Thank you especially to the trustees of Nuffield and to my sponsor, the John Oldacre Foundation. This has truly been a really tremendous opportunity, and I urge anyone thinking about doing a Nuffield to do it. I'd also like to thank my wife and children for encouraging me to start on the journey of a lifetime. I'm still travelling on that journey, and I hope and intend to bring as many of you with me as I can. Thank you very much.